Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. My first reading roundup of 2021. So let's just dive right in. The first book I want to talk about is an advanced reader copy that I received through NetGalley, and my kind of first advanced reader copy of 2021, and this is City of Lies by Victoria Thompson. This is a historical mystery and it's the fourth in the series. It's her Counterfeit Lady series. Now I have read the first book in the series, but I hadn't continued on. It just kind of got lost in the shuffle. I read a lot of series. But I really enjoy this series. I like Victoria Thompson. I've read all of her other series. Her Midwife series that is set in early 19th century, late 1800s, early 19th century New York as well. So this is also set in New York, and this particular book in this series is post World War I. World War I is over, and our main character, Elizabeth, is planning her wedding to Gideon. And I just really like this series. It was a great book, and I don't want to give too much away if you've never read this series, but Elizabeth, and you learn this right off the top from the first book, so I can talk about this part of this. But Elizabeth is a con artist, or by this point in the series, she was a con artist. She grew up in a family of grifters. And one thing, so I just love that about this series, that Victoria Thompson has found a unique character. I've never read a mystery series where there's a con artist like this, where it's a woman in early 1900s New York. I just find that so fascinating. Elizabeth is such an interesting character. I love that the characters that she meets, and that she's really struggling to change. As the series advances, you see that she is struggling to change, that she's struggling to fit into society, to become a better person, and she's trying to figure out how to use her skills, her gifts, in an honest way to help other people. And I just think that it's so fascinating. The other characters in this series are really very interesting. And so one thing that I loved in this one is that there's like 3 or 4 cons going on throughout the book, and I was so invested. I wanted to know what was going to happen in all of them, and kind of how the cons play out. Like, I just think it's just so fascinating. I really enjoy her writing style. The plot, it had a nice pace. It didn't drag at all, and there was really solid plot development. Like there was a really nice advancement through, an introduction and rising action and the climax and a bit of a denouement. I like that in my stories. I need to have a bit of a denouement. I hate it when it ends really abruptly right after the climax. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think, like, the thing that I love the most about this series is that she's telling a different kind of historical mystery. And I love that. And so, yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to make sure I go back and read the second and the third one that I haven't yet. And I hope that there is more to come in this series. All right. Next, I need to actually talk about 2 books that I technically finished in 2020. I read these right at the end of the month, but I had kind of already done my last video, kind of reading roundup type video for 2020, so I'm gonna slip them in here. So I read 12 Days at Bleakly Manor by Michelle Griep, I think. This was a book that I heard about from Kate Howe. And it was Christmas, and so I'm always looking for a good kind of seasonal mystery in December. So I thought that I'd give this one a try. In this book, and it was interesting, it's apparently a book 1 in a series called Once Upon a Dickens Christmas, which intrigued me. Our main character, whose name I forget, and I can't believe it. Oh yeah, Clara Chapman. She receives an intriguing invitation to spend 12 days at Bleakly Manor. She doesn't know who this invitation is from. She's never been to Bleakly Manor, but if she stays at Bleakly Manor for 12 days, she will receive £500. And so that is kind of at that time, and for her specifically, that's life-changing money. And so she goes, and of course things happen. So this one, I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. It had a really intriguing premise that I thought kind of ended up just okay. I was trying to figure out like where this was going, who set this all up, and what was the purpose. And when that ultimately all came out, I was like, all right, that's all right. So this was good. It was a fun little Christmas seasonal mystery. It was all right. Yeah, so 3 stars. And then the very last book that I read for 2020 was Guess Who by Chris McGeorge. Now this was really fun. I gave this 4 stars. This is a kind of a closed circle, locked room mystery with a modern day twist. I was really intrigued by the premise of this one. 1 room, 5 suspects, 3 hours to find a killer. So it was just intriguing. So our main character is Morgan Shepherd, and he kind of wakes up handcuffed to the bed in a hotel room. There are 5 other people in the room and a body in the bathtub. And he is given 5 hours to figure out which of the 5 people in that room killed the person in the bathtub. And it was just like, what an intriguing premise, right? So you learn right away that Morgan Shepherd is kind of famous. He's a TV celebrity. He has a show where he's TV's resident detective, and he kind of solves mysteries in people's lives, and he's become very famous. He doesn't really care about the consequences to the people that he has on his show. You find out that when he was a child, he solved a mystery. A teacher died at his school. He solved that mystery and figured out who the killer was, and that kind of led to his then becoming a famous TV personality. You learn that being famous and known is really important to him. This was just a great book. I mean, like, he's given 3 hours to figure out who killed the person who is in the bathtub, or they all die. They're locked in this hotel room. So him trying to figure out who these people are, what their connection is, who is the person in the bathtub, like, it was really, really good. I loved the time factor, you know, like knowing that he only had 3 hours. Yeah, it was just really good. You learn, you know, more about his background. I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really fun ride. It was a quick read, and I would totally read more from this author. And then we move swiftly into January 2021. And I read Death in Kew Gardens by Jennifer Ashley. This is the 3rd or 4th in her series. This is a Victorian mystery series where the main character is Kat Holloway. She is a cook in kind of a fancy house in Mayfair. She's like not quite 30, so it's interesting because she's a lot younger than I kind of expected when I read this series. But she's great. She's a great character. I really enjoy that. I love that this one was set in and around Kew Gardens. I thought that was so fascinating. And botany and tea were kind of really key parts in this story. I just really enjoy this series. It's got good characters and interesting mysteries and interesting locations too. I like that it's set in Victorian London. is always good. And yeah, it's just a good, solid historical mystery series that I'm definitely going to keep going with. I've got the newest one is kind of on hold for me at the library. Yeah, I gave it 4 stars. And if you're looking for kind of a good, fun Victorian mystery series, then you might want to give this one a try. It's really interesting. And then I read The Norfolk Mystery by Ian Sansom. This is another historical mystery series. This is the first in the series. It's set in the 30s, and the main character is Sefton. Sorry, I completely forgot his name. Stephen Sefton. Stephen Sefton is, we find out, is a young man who doesn't quite know what to do with his life. He finished at Oxford, and he ended up going over to Spain during their Civil War. And now he has come home. It's 1937 or 38. And he has no money. He is experiencing nightmares and trauma from what happened when he was in Spain. He desperately needs a job. And he sees in the newspaper an article, Mr. Morley, the People's Professor, is looking for an assistant. And so he goes to this job interview, and he ends up getting hired as an assistant to Morley. And Morley's newest endeavor is to write a guide for each of the counties in England before they change irrevocably. He wants to write about the counties as they were at a specific point in time. And Morley is this hilarious character. Like, he is just constantly on the move, constantly working. He is extremely prolific, very opinionated. And so it's a great, that's a great setup, because Sefton is just thrown into this situation that he does not understand at all. And this pace of life that he just is completely baffled by. Morley has a daughter called Miriam who goes with them on their adventures. She drives the car. And she's kind of one of those, she's like a leftover from the Bright Young Things, where, she's almost manic in how she lives, right? She's constantly looking for excitement, adventure, and it's almost like you feel like if she slows down at all, then life would be too depressing for her. And so she just needs to keep looking for adventure, keep looking for excitement in her life. They're really interesting characters. Now, despite what the cover maybe looks like, these are not cozies at all, but they're really interesting stories. So in this first one, they head to Norfolk to write their first country guide. And when they arrive in the first town they're coming to visit, they go to visit the church, and they discover a woman who comes running out of the church, and she's all upset, and they go in to discover that the vicar is hanging from a beam in the church. And so they kind of get involved in that. Did he commit suicide? Was he murdered? What happened? These are told in first person from Sefton's perspective, which is great because, he's just basically along for the ride, trying to figure things out and trying to understand, Morley and how Morley works. So yeah, it was good. I gave it 3.5 stars. I thought the opening was really great. Chapter 1. Reminiscences, of course, make for sad, depressing literature. Nonetheless, some stories must be told. All right, and then I read The Way of All Flesh. This was a reread for me. I wanted to read it in anticipation of the second book is coming out, and I wanted to remind myself this is another historical mystery set in Edinburgh in 1847. The main character is Raven, and he is the apprentice to Dr. Simpson. Dr. Simpson is an obstetrician who is really very interested in discovering a better way to anesthetize his patients than using ether. Ether is what they currently use, but it's dangerous, and it's been problematic. So he spends a lot of his time, and this is kind of a funny part of the book, in experimenting with different compounds, different chemicals to try and come up with a way to anesthetize his patients. And he's more than happy to experiment on himself, and the other doctors in his surroundings are more than happy to do that as well. And so that's kind of a funny part of the story. There's a housemaid called Sarah, who is a woman out of her time. She is a housemaid because that's the kind of job that a single woman can get then, but she has aspirations much higher than that. And so Dr. Simpson has surgery in his house. The patients come and he has his appointments there. And so she spends some of her time helping with that, like organizing the patients and sending them in and stuff like that. And she wishes that could be what she does more, you know, like she wishes that there was some way that she could be a doctor herself. So yeah, they're just really interesting characters. And you discover too that women have been dying, and Raven is particularly, there's a bit of a personal connection with one of them, is looking into why that is and who may be responsible for that. These are told in the third person. There are themes of class and reputation and power, women's struggle for recognition. So here's a perfect example. Sarah is sent to the chemist to pick some things up for the doctor, and she knows that they're looking for a new assistant at the chemist, and so she asks about whether or not that could be someone like her. And Mr. Duncan says, Sarah, our assistants must inspire confidence in our customers. For that, only a man will do. So I feel bad for Sarah. And then one more. So this is towards the end of the story, but this is a great example of the writing style in this book, and kind of why I love this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. The final outcome of any sequence of events can turn on many pivots. There is always a multiplicity of nodes, intersections in a fragile system of happenstance, whereby the slightest divergence at one would have altered all. The fate of chloroform and the mystery of Evie's death were intertwined in just such a system, and either could have easily been diverted down a path to a dead end by the slightest whim of chance. So yeah, this is a great historical mystery set in Edinburgh that I really, really enjoyed. And then I was in the mood for some good isolated mystery, closed circle mystery, so I picked up Swiss Vendetta by Tracee de Hahn. This is set in Lausanne in Switzerland, and the main character is Inspector Agnes Luthi. She is a Swiss-American police officer who up until now in her career has been in financial crimes. But her husband recently passed away. She needed a change, and so she transferred to violent crimes. So that's quite the change for you. And so she's in the office on her very first day. There is a blizzard approaching that everyone knows is going to be really very bad. But she's still at the office when a call comes in about a body found on the lawn of a chateau that's kind of right on the lake. And so she goes, knowing that other members of the team are gonna be there, hopefully as well. But she arrives, and the only other people that are there are a local, kind of the local village police officer who managed to get there, And then a little bit later, another police officer arrives who is the same rank as her, and a doctor. And they are brought by someone who was in the village to help them get there. She couldn't even get all the way to the chateau because of the blizzard. Because the chateau is on the lake, kind of at the bottom of a hill, and so once she arrives, that's it. They're all cut off because of the blizzard and the ice. Nobody is going anywhere, and then the power goes out and her phone goes down, and so she really is isolated at this chateau. I thought that it was a great description of the storm and the ice and the power outage and how it impedes the investigation. But ultimately, I was a little disappointed, and only because of what I was hoping for from this book. I really wanted a good isolated closed circle mystery. And when I read those, what I want is a certain level of tension building and kind of constant when you're stuck in a house with a killer. And I just didn't feel like that tension was there in this book. Considering that she was stuck in a house with a killer, I just didn't feel that tension. And it also wasn't quite as isolated as I had thought, because she can get to the next door house. There's a mansion next to the chateau on the lake, and now there's only an old man who lives there with his nurse and a very limited staff. But still, so it's not quite as isolated, and she's back and forth to there all the time. And then another character arrives on day 2. Now, it was very difficult for him to get there, but still, it wasn't quite as isolated as I had hoped. I also thought that she had a really weird way of investigating. Now, granted, it was her first day in violent crimes, but I just thought, like, she interviewed people, but it never felt very formal, and she allowed them to end interviews kind of before she got the information that she needed to get, and it never really felt like there was any urgency to continue these interviews and to get that information that she needed. Attention was given to certain things, but not other things. So, for example, there's a child at this chateau, and at one point in the book, she kind of disappears, and people don't really know where she is. She has often been found hiding before, so at first there's not a huge amount of fuss made about it. But you'd think that if you're in a chateau with a killer, you would make that a priority to find that little girl, and I just thought, like, she took way too long for that to be important. So anyway, I gave it 3 stars. I liked it. It was a fun mystery, but it wasn't quite what I was looking for in an isolated closed circle mystery. And then I read Death in Devon, which is the second in the County Guides mystery series by Ian Sansom. So again, these are told from the first person from Stephen Sefton. One thing that I found interesting is that this book takes place 2 weeks after the events of the first book, which makes sense because Mr. Morley wants to get his guide series finished by 1940. He kind of set himself this deadline, and that's a lot of books to write in 2 years, so they got to get going. So in this book, they are heading off to Devon. And the first stop on their tour is a boys' school, and Morley has been asked by an old friend of his, Mr. Standish, who is the headmaster. Morley is asked to give the speech at the Founders' Day celebrations. So they go at first to that school. You get some fun stuff about Devon in this story. There's a lot about cider and how you make cider. There's also an awful lot about surfing, but which was actually really interesting. And they talk about Agatha Christie, and this is true. Agatha Christie did enjoy surfing when she was younger, and so in this book they talk about how Mr. Morley has met her and surfed with her, which was kind of a funny little Funny little thing that was not important to the story. So yeah, this one, again, I enjoyed it. Again, learning a little bit more about these characters, and it was an interesting mystery. I gave it 4 stars. The last book that I want to talk about is The Thursday Murder Club, and I finished this just before I started filming this video. This is by Richard Osman, and it came out in 2020. And I have to say, I loved this book. It was so fun. It was just so much fun. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. So this is a mystery set in Kent, in a retirement village. And the 4 main characters are the members of the Thursday Murder Club. And so I loved the characters in this book. I loved the setting. It was just so funny and so witty. This is told in the present tense, and there's also some diary entries from one of the members called Joyce. So you have Elizabeth, who used to be like Secret Service or a spy or something. They never say it flat out, but there's enough hints. And then you have Ibrahim, who was a psychologist, and Ron, who was involved kind of in all the strikes in the 70s. And then you have Joyce, who was a nurse. And what they do is they meet every Thursday and try to solve a cold case. And so they get super excited when there's a real live murder for them to investigate at their retirement village. So yeah, I was all in for this book. It worked for me. It was funny. It was witty. I loved the characters. I loved how basically they're all in their 70s, and so they just didn't care anymore. They just were like, you know, really, are we really going to be arrested for any of our shenanigans? You know, they were just all in for investigating. And because of Elizabeth's past, she knows people, she can get things done. It was just so very entertaining. And as far as a mystery goes, it was well done. Now, I read a lot of mysteries, and I can more often than not figure out who the killer is and why they did it. But I have to confess, in this book, I 100% fell into the trap that the author laid for me, and I can't believe I did it. I was just like, what? I 100% fell into the trap, and I just loved it. I just loved it, and I hope that there is more coming in this series. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was just fantastic. So that's what I have been reading recently. Have you read any of these books? I would love to chat with you about them in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.